The room fell silent as the gavel struck 3 times. Not the comfortable silence of anticipation, but the suffocating quiet that precedes a storm. Hillary Clinton adjusted her collar, a small gesture that betrayed more than her carefully composed expression ever would. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsed answers with a team of lawyers who charged by the minute, anticipated every question that might come. But she had not prepared for this. She had not prepared for the woman now sitting across from her. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard looked younger than her years, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen combat, who had watched friends die, who understood the difference between political posturing and actual betrayal. Those eyes now fixed on Clinton, with a focus that made the former Secretary of State shift almost imperceptibly in her leather chair. The Senate Intelligence Committee's chamber was packed beyond capacity. Journalists lined the walls, their cameras forming a perimeter of judgment. Every major network had cleared their afternoon programming. Social media was already exploding, and not a single question had been asked yet, because everyone knew what was coming. Everyone except, perhaps, Hillary Clinton herself, who still believed she could talk her way out of anything. Senator Tom Cotton, the committee chairman, leaned into his microphone. The sound system crackled briefly, a technological imperfection that somehow made the moment more real, less rehearsed. "Mrs. Clinton," he said, his Arkansas drawl clipping the words short, "thank you for appearing before this committee today." Clinton nodded, her smile practiced and hollow. "Thank you for having me, Senator." But Cotton wasn't the one Clinton needed to worry about. Tulsi Gabbard opened a manila folder, the beige cover worn at the edges, suggesting it had been reviewed countless times. The sound of paper sliding against paper echoed in the cavernous room. She pulled out a single sheet and held it up so the cameras could capture it, though the text was too small for anyone to read from a distance. "October 17, 2019, Gabbard began, her voice steady and measured, each word enunciated with military precision. "You appeared on a podcast hosted by David Plouffe, former advisor to President Obama. During that appearance, you made certain statements about me. Would you like to tell this committee what you said, or should I read it for you?" Clinton's smile tightened. "I believe I was discussing concerns about foreign interference in our elections." "That's not what I asked." Gabbard's interruption was surgical, not aggressive, just factual. "I asked what you said about me specifically." The silence stretched. Clinton glanced at her attorney, a thin man with silver hair who looked like he billed $1,000 an hour and earned every penny. He gave the slightest shake of his head, a gesture so minimal it might have been imagined. Clinton turned back to Gabbard. "I suggested that Russia might be attempting to influence certain candidates. You called me a Russian asset." Gabbard set down the paper and pulled out another document. "When the statement caused controversy, your spokesperson didn't walk it back. Instead, your spokesperson tweeted at me in Russian. In Russian, Mrs. Clinton, mocking me for objecting to being called a traitor to my country." The room erupted, not with sound but with a collective intake of breath, as if everyone had simultaneously realized they were watching something historic. Reporters typed frantically. Senators leaned forward. Even the stenographer paused, fingers hovering over keys. Clinton's face remained neutral, but her hands, resting on the polished oak table, pressed down hard enough that her knuckles whitened. "Political discourse can be heated. Political discourse." Gabbard repeated the words slowly, tasting them, finding them insufficient. "Mrs. Clinton, you didn't call me wrong on policy. You didn't criticize my voting record. You accused a sitting member of Congress, a combat veteran who deployed to Iraq, of being a foreign agent. You questioned my loyalty to the United States of America on national television, knowing that millions of people would hear it, knowing that it would follow me for years, knowing that it could destroy my career and my reputation." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room like ash after an explosion. "But here's what really interests this committee: the coordination, the planning, the systematic nature of what you did." Gabbard pulled out a stack of papers, each one tagged with a colored tab. "These are internal communications from your political operation, obtained through subpoena. October 12, 2019, 5 days before that podcast appearance." Subject line, TG strategy. Clinton's attorney leaned in, whispering urgently. She waved him away, but the gesture lacked conviction. Gabbard began reading. Quote, "We need to move on the Gabbard-Russia angle before she gains more traction. NBC and CNN contacts are prepped. State Department sources can provide background on Syria meetings. Keep intel community sources anonymous." End quote. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You didn't just attack me, Mrs. Clinton. You orchestrated a coordinated campaign involving multiple media outlets and, according to your own staff's emails, intelligence community sources. You weaponized your political connections and your former position as Secretary of State to destroy someone you saw as a threat, not because you had evidence, but because I had the audacity to criticize your foreign policy record." Senator Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat, shifted uncomfortably. He had defended Clinton for years, through every scandal, every investigation, every controversy. But even he looked troubled now, because this wasn't about partisan politics. This was about something darker, something that transcended party lines. This was about power and what people would do to keep it. Gabbard continued, her voice never rising, never betraying emotion. That made it worse somehow, more devastating than any theatrical outburst could have been. "Mrs. Clinton, did you ever see any intelligence assessment, any classified briefing, any credible information whatsoever suggesting that I had improper contact with Russian officials or that I was being influenced by Russian intelligence?" Clinton opened her mouth, then closed it. Her attorney scribbled something on a legal pad and pushed it toward her. She glanced at it, then back at Gabbard. "I was expressing concerns based on patterns of behavior. That's not what I asked. Yes or no, Mrs. Clinton, did you ever see any intelligence supporting your accusation?" Another pause, longer this time. In the gallery, someone's phone buzzed, the sound absurdly loud in the silence. A marshal moved to confiscate it, and that small drama played out in everyone's peripheral vision while they waited for Clinton to answer. "No." The word came out barely above a whisper, but the microphones caught it. The stenographer's fingers flew. Cameras zoomed in. And Tulsi Gabbard, the woman Hillary Clinton had tried to destroy, simply nodded once and reached for another folder. "Let's talk about your time as Secretary of State," she said. And even the reporters who thought they knew where this was going realized they had underestimated what was about to unfold. Specifically, let's discuss how you handled America's most sensitive secrets. Clinton had faced congressional hearings before. She had sat through 11 hours of Benghazi questioning, emerged unbowed, and gone on to nearly win the presidency. She was a survivor, a political animal who had outlasted every scandal that would have destroyed a lesser politician. But this was different. This wasn't a Republican-led investigation she could dismiss as partisan. This was Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat, a veteran, someone who couldn't be easily dismissed or discredited. And Gabbard had evidence. The private email server. Clinton knew it was coming. She had talked about it hundreds of times, refined her answers, developed explanations that, if not satisfying, were at least defensible. She began to speak, but Gabbard held up a hand. "Please don't insult this committee by repeating the talking points, Mrs. Clinton. We've all heard them. Using a private email account was allowed. Colin Powell did it. It was for convenience. You've said all of this before." Gabbard's eyes hardened. "But we're not talking about an email account. We're talking about a server in your basement that contained information classified at the Special Access Program level. Information so sensitive that even most people with top-secret clearance can't access it. Information that, if compromised, could get intelligence sources killed." She pulled out a timeline, large enough that the cameras could capture it clearly. It showed dates, events, and connections mapped out with the precision of a military operation. Which made sense, because Gabbard had been a military officer, and she knew how to build a case. "March 4, 2015, she read. "The House Select Committee on Benghazi issues a subpoena for all documents related to Libya, including emails. Your attorneys acknowledge receipt. March 25 through March 31, 2015. An employee at Platte River Networks, the company managing your server, uses a program called BleachBit to permanently delete approximately 33,000 emails. Gabbard looked up. Mrs. Clinton, do you know what BleachBit is? It's a software program for managing disk space. It's a software program designed to prevent forensic recovery of deleted data. Gabbard's correction was gentle but firm. When you delete a file normally, it can often be recovered by investigators. BleachBit overwrites the data multiple times, making recovery virtually impossible. As one FBI investigator testified to Congress, you don't use BleachBit for yoga schedules. You use it when you really don't want anyone to see what you're hiding. She let that sink in before continuing. The timeline is interesting, Mrs. Clinton. December 2014, your Chief of Staff Cheryl Mills instructs Platte River Networks to change the retention policy and delete emails older than 60 days. But the technician forgets. Then March 2015, 3 weeks after Congress subpoenas your records, that same technician suddenly remembers and carries out the deletion, using BleachBit to ensure no one can ever recover those emails. I was not personally involved in the deletion. Yes, I know. That's the phrase your attorneys always use. You weren't personally involved in the deletion. Gabbard leaned forward. But you were personally involved in setting up the private server. You were personally involved in conducting classified business on that server. You were personally involved in deciding which emails were work-related and which were personal. And you personally benefited from the fact that 33,000 emails were destroyed using military-grade deletion software 3 weeks after Congress demanded them. Senator Cotton interjected, his voice carrying a prosecutorial edge he'd perfected as a former Army officer. Director Gabbard, what did the FBI investigation find regarding those deleted emails? FBI recovered over 17,000 work-related emails from the batch Mrs. Clinton's team had designated as personal and deleted. Let me repeat that. 17,000 work-related emails that should have been preserved and turned over to Congress were instead marked as personal, deleted, and scrubbed with BleachBit. The FBI also found that 110 emails on Mrs. Clinton's server contained classified information that was classified at the time it was sent or received. 22 of those were top secret. 8 email chains contained special access program information. She pulled out a document and held it up. This is Mrs. Clinton's signed non-disclosure agreement from when she became Secretary of State in 2009. It states, and I quote, "I hereby acknowledge that I have received a security indoctrination concerning the nature and protection of classified information. I understand that unauthorized disclosure, unauthorized retention, or negligent handling of classified information by me could cause damage or irreparable injury to the United States, or could be used to advantage by a foreign nation." Gabbard set down the document and looked directly at Clinton. "Your signature is at the bottom, Mrs. Clinton. You acknowledged you understood the rules. You acknowledged that negligent handling of classified information could harm the United States. And then you set up a private server in your basement and conducted the nation's most sensitive business on it. When Congress came asking questions, the emails were destroyed. When the FBI investigated, you claimed you didn't know how to identify classified information despite having received training on exactly that. And when investigators pointed out that other government employees had faced criminal charges for far less serious violations, you said they were different because they had intent." She paused, and her next words carried the weight of personal experience. "Mrs. Clinton, I served in Iraq. I handled classified information in a combat zone. If I had set up a private server and sent classified emails through it, I would have been court-martialed. If I had destroyed evidence after receiving a subpoena, I would be in military prison. But you walked away without charges because the FBI said they couldn't prove intent." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the reporters had stopped typing. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft whir of camera mechanisms capturing every moment. Senator Warner cleared his throat. "Mrs. Clinton, I think what troubles many of us is the pattern. Not just the server, but the deletion. Not just the deletion, but the use of BleachBit. Not just BleachBit, but the destroyed mobile devices. 13 devices, according to the FBI, some destroyed with hammers. The accumulation of all these security violations, any one of which would have ended the career of a junior State Department employee, and yet you faced no consequences. Clinton finally spoke, her voice tight with suppressed anger. I was cleared by the FBI, Director Kamai said. Director Kamai said you were extremely careless with highly classified information, Gabbard interrupted. That's not the same as cleared. He also said that if anyone else at the State Department had done what you did, they would face severe consequences. You didn't face consequences, Mrs. Clinton, not because you didn't do what you're accused of, but because you were too politically powerful to prosecute. She pulled out another stack of documents. Let me give this committee some context. In 2015, Naval Reservist Brian Nishimura was convicted of unauthorized removal and retention of classified materials. He downloaded classified information to his personal device. He was sentenced to 2 years probation and fined $7,500. His career was over. In 2016, Marine Major Jason Bresler was forced out of the Marines for sending a single classified email over an unclassified system to warn colleagues about a security threat, an email that may have saved lives. His career was destroyed. Gabbard looked up from the documents. Mrs. Clinton maintained a private server with special access program information in her basement. She conducted classified business on that server for 4 years. When ordered to preserve evidence, 33,000 emails were destroyed using software designed to prevent recovery, and yet she faced no criminal charges, suffered no professional consequences, and went on to run for President of the United States. She closed the folder with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silent chamber. Tell me, Mrs. Clinton, do you think that's justice? Do you think that's the equal application of the law? Or do you think it's evidence of a two-tiered system where the powerful play by different rules than everyone else? Clinton's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. She took a long drink, buying time, searching for the words that had always come so easily before. But there were no words. Not really. Because everything Gabbard had said was true, documented, and impossible to explain away. I deeply regret the decisions I made regarding my email server, Clinton finally said, the words sounding rehearsed because they were. I have said that many times. If I could go back. If you could go back, would you follow the rules? Gabbard's question was simple, direct, devastating. Or would you do the same thing again and hope you could get away with it because of who you are? No answer came. The cameras captured Clinton's face, older now, more lined with stress, the careful facade cracking at the edges. Across from her, Tulsi Gabbard sat with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world and all the evidence she needed. The afternoon session began with new documents, new revelations, new wounds. Gabbard placed photographs on the table, not documents this time, but images that seared themselves into the consciousness of everyone watching. A diplomatic compound engulfed in flames. Smoke rising into a dark Libyan sky. Debris scattered across scorched earth. September 11, 2012, Gabbard said quietly. Benghazi, Libya. 4 Americans died that night. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, former Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty. She paused, letting the names hang in the air. I want to talk about what you knew when you knew it, and most importantly, what you told the American people. Clinton's expression shifted into one she had worn before at numerous hearings in countless interviews. Solemn, pained, practiced. Those deaths haunt me to this day. I take full responsibility. You've said those words before, Mrs. Clinton, many times, but taking responsibility and facing consequences are two different things. Gabbard pulled out a timeline, marked with red flags at crucial points. At 4:05 p.m. Washington time on September 11, 2012, you received an email from your staff. Subject line, Update on Benghazi attack. The email states, Ansar al-Sharia has claimed responsibility. Ansar al-Sharia is a terrorist organization. So at 4:05 p.m., within hours of the attack, you knew this was terrorism, not a protest, not a spontaneous demonstration, a planned terrorist attack. She looked up. Is that correct, Mrs. Clinton? The situation was fluid. Initial reports are often. At 10:08 p.m. that same night, Gabbard continued, reading from another document, you sent an email to your daughter Chelsea. You wrote, quote, "Two of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-like group," end quote. So you told your daughter the truth. It was terrorism. The room was so quiet that the soft buzz of fluorescent lights became audible. The next day, September 12th, you spoke with Egyptian Prime Minister Hesham Kandil. According to the State Department transcript, you told him, "We know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest." So you told a foreign leader the truth. It was terrorism. It wasn't about a video. Gabbard set down the documents and locked eyes with Clinton. You knew it was terrorism. You told your family it was terrorism. You told foreign leaders it was terrorism. But what did you tell the American people? She didn't wait for an answer. On September 14th, at Dover Air Force Base, as the flag-draped coffins of those 4 Americans were being carried off a plane, you stood with their families. Tyrone Woods' father, Charles Woods, took notes during your conversation. He wrote down your words. "We will make sure that the person who made that film is arrested and prosecuted." The silence in the chamber became suffocating. Even the most hardened reporters looked uncomfortable. You told those families, those grieving families, that their sons and husbands died because of a YouTube video. You looked them in the eyes while they stood next to coffins and you lied. You lied because in 7 weeks there was an election, and the truth was politically inconvenient. Clinton's face flushed red. "That is absolutely false. I never." On September 14th, your State Department authorized $70,000 in taxpayer money for advertisements in Pakistan denouncing an anti-Muslim video. You sent your spokesperson, Susan Rice, to 5 Sunday morning shows where she blamed the attack on the video and a spontaneous protest. You issued a statement linking the attack to the video. And 2 weeks later, on September 26th, you stood before the United Nations and referenced the video 6 times in your speech. Gabbard leaned back, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You knew the truth, Mrs. Clinton. You knew it was terrorism from the very beginning. But you couldn't tell the American people that al-Qaeda was active and attacking Americans 7 weeks before an election where President Obama was running on the narrative that he had defeated al-Qaeda. So you blamed a video. You blamed a filmmaker. You let Susan Rice go on television and repeat that lie. And when the families of the dead called you a liar, you and your allies in the media destroyed them." She pulled out another document. "This is from your testimony before Congress in January 2013, 4 months after the attack. Senator Ron Johnson pressed you on the false video narrative. Do you remember what you said?" Clinton's jaw clenched. Everyone in the room knew what was coming. The moment that had become infamous, that had been played on news shows and shared on social media millions of times. Gabbard read it anyway. Quote, "With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?" End quote. She set down the paper and looked at Clinton with something approaching contempt. "It makes a difference to Charles Woods, who lost his son Tyrone. It makes a difference to Kate Quigley, who lost her son Glenn. It makes a difference to Sean Smith's mother Patricia, who spent the rest of her life saying you lied to her face. And it makes a difference to the American people, who deserve to know when their government is lying to them." Senator Cotton leaned forward. "Director Gabbard, the State Department received over 600 requests for additional security at the Benghazi compound in the months before the attack. What happened to those requests?" "They were denied or ignored, Senator. Multiple diplomatic security agents testified that they were operating in an extremely dangerous environment with inadequate protection. One agent told investigators that the State Department was playing terrorist roulette, and Mrs. Clinton, as Secretary of State, would have been aware of these security concerns. The State Department reviews thousands of security requests. I can't be expected to personally review every." Ambassador Stevens personally asked for additional security. Gabbard's interruption was surgical. "In cables that came directly to your office. This wasn't some low-level request lost in bureaucracy. The ambassador himself, your personal friend, was asking for help, and he didn't get it. She pulled out another photograph, this one of Ambassador Stevens alive, smiling at some diplomatic function. Ambassador Stevens sent a cable on August 16, 2012, less than a month before he died. He detailed the security situation in Benghazi, the presence of terrorist groups, the vulnerability of the compound. He requested additional security personnel. His request was denied. Gabbard's voice thickened with emotion for the first time. On September 11th, when the attack began, Americans at the diplomatic compound and the CIA annex fought for 13 hours. 13 hours, Mrs. Clinton. Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were at a CIA facility a mile away. They didn't have to respond. It wasn't their job. But when they heard the attack, they grabbed their weapons and rushed to help. They fought on a rooftop for hours, calling for support that never came. They died protecting Americans, because that's what warriors do. She paused, visibly struggling to maintain composure. I've been in combat, Mrs. Clinton. I know what it's like to call for support and have your military move heaven and earth to reach you. Those men fought for 13 hours. Fighter jets could have been there from Italy in an hour. Special operations forces could have been mobilized. But no help came. And when morning broke and the shooting stopped, 4 Americans were dead. So when you stood before Congress and said, "What difference does it make?" Here's the difference. Those men died because of decisions you made. You championed the intervention in Libya that destabilized the country. You ignored security requests from your own ambassador. You left Americans vulnerable in a terrorist haven. And when they died, you lied about why, because the truth would hurt your boss's re-election campaign. Clinton sat frozen, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her attorney was whispering urgently, but she seemed not to hear him. In the gallery, several people were quietly crying. Reporters who had covered politics for decades looked shaken, because this wasn't political theater. This was a reckoning. Gabbard allowed herself a moment to collect her emotions, then pulled out a new set of documents. When she spoke again, her voice had returned to that measured, prosecutorial tone. Let's talk about the Clinton Foundation. Clinton straightened in her chair, sensing new danger. The Clinton Foundation has done tremendous humanitarian work around the world. I'm not questioning the foundation's charitable activities, Mrs. Clinton. I'm questioning the foreign governments and wealthy individuals who donated millions to your family foundation while you served as Secretary of State, because the pattern raises serious questions about corruption and pay-to-play politics. She pulled out a chart showing donation amounts. Between 2009 and 2013, while you were Secretary of State, the Clinton Foundation received significant donations from foreign governments. Saudi Arabia, $10 to $25 million. Qatar, $1 to $5 million. Kuwait, $1 to $5 million. The United Arab Emirates, $1 to $5 million. Oman, $1 to $5 million. Algeria, $500,000. Which was actually illegal under the agreement you made with the Obama administration not to accept foreign government donations while you were Secretary of State. Gabbard looked up. These aren't countries known for their commitment to women's rights, LGBTQ equality, or democratic values, causes your foundation claims to champion. So why did these governments donate millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation while you were America's chief diplomat? They supported our humanitarian work in their regions. Did they? Gabbard pulled out internal emails. Because these emails tell a different story. This one is from Doug Band, who ran the Clinton Global Initiative. He's writing to your deputies Huma Abedin and Cheryl Mills. He asks them to help a major foundation donor get a meeting with you. When questioned about whether the meeting is necessary, Abedin responds, "He's a significant donor. We should try to accommodate." She pulled out more emails. Here's another where Band asks your State Department staff to help secure a position for someone who has done a lot for the foundation. Your staff responds by arranging meetings and making introductions. Here's an email thread about helping foundation donors obtain visas. Another about facilitating a meeting between a donor and a foreign official. The pattern is consistent and clear. People gave money to your family foundation, and received access to you and favors from your staff. Senator Cotton interjected. Director Gabbard, can you give the committee a specific example of a decision Secretary Clinton made that may have benefited foundation donors? Yes, Senator. Uranium One. Gabbard pulled out a thick folder. In 2010, a company called Uranium One, which controlled approximately 20% of America's uranium production capacity, was being acquired by Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear agency. This required approval from 9 U.S. government agencies, including the State Department. She opened the file and began reading. The chairman of Uranium One, Ian Telfer, donated $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation through his family charity during and after the sale process. Other shareholders in Uranium One donated millions more. Former President Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow by a Russian investment bank with ties to the Kremlin. The speech was given while the Uranium One deal was under State Department review. Clinton started to object, but Gabbard continued. The State Department approved the sale. 20% of America's uranium production capacity ended up under Russian control, and millions of dollars flowed to your family foundation from people who directly benefited from that sale. I was not personally involved in that decision. There were 9 agencies, but the State Department was one of them, and you appointed the person who represented state on the committee. You expect this committee to believe that millions in donations to your family foundation had no influence whatsoever. She pulled out more documents. Or let's talk about Haiti. After the devastating 2010 earthquake, billions in aid flowed to Haiti. The State Department played a major role in coordinating that aid. The Clinton Foundation also got heavily involved, and somehow, reconstruction contracts kept going to Clinton Foundation donors and friends. Your brother, Tony Rodham, sat on the board of VCS Mining, which received one of the first gold mining permits issued in Haiti in over 50 years. Your brother had no mining experience, Mrs. Clinton. The permit raised serious environmental and corruption concerns, but he got it while you were coordinating Haiti relief. She pulled out newspaper clippings. Haitian activists protested. They called it disaster capitalism. Haiti Grassroots Watch investigated and documented how Clinton Foundation donors received preferential treatment for reconstruction contracts. The Haitian people saw their country treated as an opportunity for Clinton allies to profit from tragedy. Gabbard leaned forward. But here's what really reveals the truth about your foundation. In 2014, as you prepared to run for president, Clinton Foundation donations surged. Foreign governments increased their giving. Your speaking fees hit record highs, $250,000 or more per speech, often from foreign entities and corporations with business before the State Department. She pulled out a financial chart. And then you lost the 2016 election. Look what happened. Clinton Foundation donations dropped by more than 75%. The Clinton Global Initiative shut down. Countries that had donated millions suddenly stopped giving. Your speaking fees disappeared. She looked directly at Clinton. If these countries and individuals were giving because they believed in your charitable work, why did they stop when you lost political power? The answer is obvious. They weren't investing in charity. They were investing in influence. They were buying access to America's Secretary of State, and when you lost power, the investment was worthless. Senator Warner spoke, his discomfort evident. Director Gabbard, correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. Foundation donations dropping after Mrs. Clinton lost the election might have other explanations. With respect, Senator, we're not talking about correlation. We're talking about a documented pattern of donations followed by favorable actions, access, and decisions. We're talking about emails explicitly linking foundation business with State Department business. We're talking about foreign governments buying influence through a family foundation. And we're talking about that money drying up the moment the influence disappeared. She turned back to Clinton. You've spent your career claiming to fight for transparency, for accountability, for the little guy. But the evidence shows you used your position as Secretary of State to enrich your family foundation, to benefit your donors, and to build a political war chest. You turned American foreign policy into a commodity for sale. Clinton's voice was tight with anger. That is a disgusting mischaracterization of decades of public service. Then explain the pattern, Mrs. Clinton. Explain the donations. Explain the emails. Explain the meetings. Explain why the money stopped when your power did. Explain it in a way that doesn't involve corruption. The silence that followed was answer enough. The hearing had been brutal. 7 hours of methodical destruction of Hillary Clinton's carefully constructed legacy. But everyone knew what was coming next. The final folder, the last revelation, the ultimate reckoning. Tulsi Gabbard had saved the worst for last. She opened a folder marked with red tabs. Inside were documents that had been declassified only recently, after years of legal battles. Documents that told a story the American people had only partially understood. The story of how Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign had weaponized American intelligence agencies against her political opponent. Mrs. Clinton, Gabbard began, her voice carrying a new edge. Let's discuss what you did when you realized you might lose the 2016 election. Clinton's eyes narrowed. I ran a campaign focused on issues that mattered to Americans. You funded the creation of a dossier making false allegations that Donald Trump was compromised by Russia. Then you used your political connections to inject that dossier into American intelligence agencies and media outlets, triggering investigations that tore this country apart for years. The room erupted in whispers. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Russia collusion narrative, the Mueller investigation, the years of accusations and investigations, it all traced back to decisions made by Clinton's campaign. And Gabbard had the receipts. In April 2016, your campaign and the Democratic National Committee hired the law firm Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie hired Fusion GPS, an opposition research firm. Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer. The total cost, over $1 million, paid through the law firm to obscure the source. She pulled out the now infamous Steele dossier, its pages worn from countless reviews. What Steele produced was this: a series of memos making salacious and completely unverified allegations about Donald Trump. The sources: Russian nationals with connections to the Kremlin. So let me be clear about what your campaign did. You paid a foreign intelligence officer to collect information from Russian sources to influence an American election. Clinton began to object, but Gabbard raised a hand. I'm not finished, because what happened next is even more troubling. Starting in September 2016, Steele began providing his memos to the FBI. He also provided them to the State Department, where your former colleagues still worked, and he provided them to media outlets, all while your campaign was funding his work. She pulled out FBI documents, newly declassified. These are FBI records showing that Christopher Steele met with FBI officials and shared his dossier. The FBI then used this dossier, paid for by your campaign, as part of their justification to seek FISA warrants to surveil Carter Page, a Trump campaign associate. Senator Cotton leaned in. Director Gabbard, did the FBI disclose to the FISA court that this dossier was funded by the Clinton campaign? No, Senator. The FBI's application mentioned that the information came from someone hired by persons who wanted to discredit Trump, but they didn't reveal that persons meant his opponent's presidential campaign. They presented political opposition research as credible intelligence. She turned back to Clinton, and her voice carried years of suppressed fury. So your campaign funded the dossier. The FBI used it to obtain surveillance warrants. Media outlets, tipped off by sources connected to your campaign and to Steele, began reporting on both the dossier's allegations and the FBI's investigation. And suddenly, in the final months of the 2016 campaign, the narrative everywhere was, Trump is compromised by Russia. Clinton's face was flushed. I had no knowledge of the specific. Your campaign paid for it. Your campaign manager Robbie Mook knew. Your campaign chairman John Podesta knew. Are you seriously claiming that a seven-figure expenditure on opposition research about your opponent's alleged Russia connections happened without your knowledge? Silence. Let me tell you what Special Counsel John Durham found in his investigation. Gabbard pulled out the Durham report, its cover marked with official seals. Durham concluded that the FBI had no verified intelligence to justify opening an investigation into the Trump campaign. He found that your campaign, through lawyer Michael Sussman, fed false information to the FBI about an alleged secret communication channel between Trump Tower and Russia's Alfa Bank. Information that was quickly debunked, but kept the investigation alive. She looked up, her eyes hard. Durham also found that by July 2016, U.S. intelligence agencies had intelligence that Russian intelligence analysis alleged that U.S. presidential candidate Hillary Clinton had approved a campaign plan to stir up a scandal against U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump by tying him to Putin and the Russians' hacking of the Democratic National Committee. That is a quote, Mrs. Clinton. On July 26, 2016, CIA Director John Brennan briefed President Obama on this intelligence. He wrote it down in his handwritten notes. Alleged approval by Hillary Clinton on July 26, 2016, of a proposal from one of her foreign policy advisors to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by the Russian security services. Gabbard paused, letting the sheer magnitude of that revelation wash over the room. The cameras were fixed on Clinton, whose expression had hardened into something brittle and dangerous. "You knew," Gabbard said, her voice dropping to a register that vibrated with suppressed intensity. "You knew because you authorized it. You created a fiction about Russian collusion to distract from your email scandal, and you used the FBI and the CIA to legitimize it. You weaponized the national security apparatus of the United States against a political opponent. That is not just dirty politics, Mrs. Clinton. That is a coup against the American people. It is the actions of a totalitarian regime, not a democratic republic." Clinton leaned into the microphone, her voice shaking with rage. "This is a conspiracy theory peddled by right-wing media. The intelligence community concluded that Russia interfered, but they didn't conclude that Trump colluded, did they?" Gabbard cut her off. "The Mueller report found no collusion. The Durham report found the investigation shouldn't have been opened. But for 3 years, this country was torn apart. Friends stopped speaking to friends. Families were divided. Faith in our institutions was shattered. And it was all based on a lie that you paid for." She flipped the page. "Let's talk about the Democratic primary of 2016. Because you didn't just manipulate the general election. You rigged your own party's nomination process to ensure you defeated Senator Bernie Sanders." A murmur went through the room. This was a wound that had never fully healed for many in the Democratic Party. Gabbard held up a document. "This is the joint fundraising agreement between the Clinton campaign, the Democratic National Committee, and 33 state Democratic parties. It was signed in August 2015, a year before you secured the nomination. It gave your campaign complete control over the DNC's finances, strategy, and staffing. In exchange for raising money, the DNC essentially became a subsidiary of the Clinton campaign." She looked at the senators. Donna Brazil, the former interim chair of the DNC, wrote about this in her book. She said she found the cancer in the DNC. She said the party was broke and that your campaign violated out in exchange for total control. She called it unethical. Was she lying, Mrs. Clinton? Clinton scoffed. Donna was selling books. "We were strengthening the party infrastructure for the general election by ensuring no one else could win the primary," Gabbard countered. "You controlled the debate schedule, limiting the number of debates and placing them at times when viewership would be low to protect your lead. You had your allies in the DNC, like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, actively working against Senator Sanders. When the WikiLeaks emails came out showing DNC officials mocking Sanders and discussing ways to undermine his campaign, you didn't condemn them. You hired Wasserman Schultz as an honorary chair of your campaign's 50-state program immediately after she was forced to resign in disgrace. And let's not forget the debate questions," Gabbard added, pulling out another email. "Donna Brazil sent an email to your campaign chairman John Podesta on March 5, 2016. Subject line: one of the questions directed to HRC tomorrow. She gave you the exact wording of a question about the death penalty that would be asked at the CNN town hall. Another email on March 12th. From time to time, I get the questions in advance. She tipped you off about a question regarding the Flint water crisis. Gabbard stared at Clinton. You received stolen debate questions. You cheated in a primary debate against a fellow Democrat. When this was revealed, you didn't apologize. You didn't admit wrongdoing. You acted as if you were entitled to that advantage. How can the American people trust you to follow the law when you can't even follow the rules of a debate? Clinton remained silent, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Gabbard's shoulder. There was no defense for this, and she knew it. The emails were public. The rigging was documented. But the damage you did goes beyond politics, Gabbard said, shifting gears. It goes to the very stability of the world. Let's talk about Syria. This was Gabbard's wheelhouse. Foreign policy, war and peace. The cost of interventionism. Throughout your time as Secretary of State and your 2016 campaign, you pushed for a no-fly zone in Syria. You advocated for arming so-called moderate rebels to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad. You demonized anyone who suggested that toppling a secular dictator might lead to something worse. She held up a transcript of a 2013 speech. You said the people of Syria are crying out for our help, but who were we helping, Mrs. Clinton? The weapons you funneled into Syria ended up in the hands of al-Qaeda affiliates like al-Nusra Front. We were effectively acting as the Air Force for terrorists. Clinton interrupted, her voice sharp. Assad is a butcher. He used chemical weapons against his own people. We had a moral obligation to destroy another country. Gabbard shot back. To repeat the mistake of Iraq. To repeat the mistake of Libya. You wanted to enforce a no-fly zone. General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified to Congress that enforcing a no-fly zone in Syria would require us to go to war with Russia and Syria. Were you prepared to start World War III to achieve regime change? I was prepared to show American leadership, Clinton said, to stand up to dictators. You call it leadership. I call it warmongering. Gabbard's voice was cold. You have never met a war you didn't want to fight. You voted for the Iraq War. You orchestrated the Libya intervention. You pushed for escalation in Syria. You supported the coup in Honduras. And every time innocent people died, countries were destroyed and America was less safe. She pulled out a photo of a slave market in Libya. This is your legacy, Mrs. Clinton. After you helped overthrow Gaddafi, Libya didn't become a Jeffersonian democracy. It became a failed state. It became a haven for ISIS. And human beings are now being sold in open-air slave markets. Black Africans are being sold for a few $100s. This happened because of your policy. Gabbard leaned forward. Do you remember what you said when you heard Gaddafi had been killed? You were on camera between interviews. You laughed. You clapped your hands and said, "We came, we saw, he died." The audio of that clip seemed to play in everyone's memory. The callousness of it. The glee. He was a dictator who sponsored terrorism, Clinton said, defending her record. He was a head of state with whom we had diplomatic relations, Gabbard corrected. And the vacuum you created by removing him led to a humanitarian nightmare that continues to this day. But that laugh, Mrs. Clinton, that laugh tells us everything we need to know about your judgment. You treat war like a game. You treat the lives of foreign leaders and American soldiers like pieces on a chessboard. Gabbard stood up, walking slowly around the table, commanding the room. It was a breach of protocol, but no one stopped her. You have spoken often about the danger of populism, about the threat of Donald Trump and his supporters. You called half the country a basket of deplorables. You said they were irredeemable. You said they were racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic. She turned to face Clinton directly. You hold the American people in contempt, don't you? The people who work in factories, the people who farm the land, the people who fight your wars. You look down on them. You think you know better than they do how they should live their lives. You think they need to be managed, controlled, and educated by their betters. Clinton straightened, finding her voice. I was calling out bigotry. I have spent my life fighting for the marginalized. You were attacking the voters because they weren't voting for you, Gabbard said. You felt entitled to their votes. And when they rejected you, you didn't ask yourself what you did wrong. You didn't ask why the working class, which used to be the backbone of the Democratic Party, had abandoned you. No, you blamed them. You blamed Russia. You blamed James Comey. You blamed Bernie Sanders. You blamed misogyny. You blamed everyone and everything except yourself. Gabbard returned to her seat and picked up a single, thin file. It was black, unmarked. "We have talked about your public record, Mrs. Clinton. Your emails, your wars, your foundation. But there is one more thing we need to discuss. The company you keep." Clinton's eyes flickered to the file. For the first time, genuine fear seemed to register behind the mask. Jeffrey Epstein. The name hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Your husband flew on Jeffrey Epstein's private plane, the Lolita Express, at least 26 times. He visited Epstein's private island. You have claimed you knew nothing about Epstein's crimes. Yet Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's procurer and partner in abuse, was a guest at your daughter's wedding. She was a guest at the Clinton Global Initiative. Gabbard opened the file. "I'm not here to prosecute your husband. I'm here to ask about your judgment. You claim to be a champion of women and girls. You made it the centerpiece of your career. Yet you and your family maintained a close relationship with one of the most prolific sex traffickers in history. A man who preyed on underage girls. A man whose entire operation was an open secret among the elite in New York and Palm Beach. Did you know?" Gabbard asked. "I knew him as a donor and a financier like many people did," Clinton said, her voice tight. "I had no knowledge of his personal behavior." "No knowledge?" Gabbard raised an eyebrow. "The police in Palm Beach knew in 2006. The FBI knew. Vanity Fair wrote about it. But the smartest woman in the world, the former First Lady and Senator from New York, had no idea that her close family friend was running a pedophile ring. She closed the file. Or was it that you simply didn't care? Was his money and his influence more important than the safety of those girls? Just like the money from Saudi Arabia was more important than their treatment of women. Just like the money from Uranium One investors was more important than national security." Gabbard sat back, looking exhausted but resolute. The room was silent. The weight of the evidence, the relentless accumulation of facts, had stripped away the aura of invincibility that had surrounded Hillary Clinton for decades. "You represent everything that is wrong with Washington, Mrs. Clinton," Gabbard said quietly. "You are the embodiment of the establishment that protects its own at the expense of the people. You believe that rules are for other people. You believe that power is its own justification. You are willing to lie, to destroy reputations, to start wars, and to sell out your country's interests to maintain your position." She looked at the cameras, addressing the American people directly. "We have a choice to make. We can continue to allow people like Hillary Clinton to run our government, to treat our tax dollars as their piggy bank and our sons and daughters as pawns in their geopolitical games. Or we can demand accountability. We can demand leaders who serve the people, not themselves. Leaders who tell the truth. Leaders who know the cost of war and value the price of peace." Gabbard turned back to Clinton one last time. "You may have escaped prosecution, Mrs. Clinton. You may have avoided a prison cell, but the verdict of history is coming, and no amount of bleachbit can delete that." Senator Cotton, looking stunned by the thoroughness of the dismantling he had just witnessed, tapped his gavel. "The committee will take a 15-minute recess." But nobody moved. The cameras kept rolling. Hillary Clinton sat alone at the witness table, her legal team packing up papers with frantic energy, trying to create a barrier between her and the gaze of the world. But for the first time in her life, there was nowhere to hide. The script had been flipped. The narrative had been broken. And in the silence of that Senate chamber, the old order was crumbling, brick by brick, word by word, brought down by the one thing it could not survive: the truth. The recess was a chaotic blur of whispers and frantic typing. Aides scurried like ants whose hill had been kicked over. In the hallway, the press gaggle was a hydra of microphones and shouting voices, but Tulsi Gabbard walked past them, eyes forward, ignoring the questions screamed in her direction. She wasn't doing this for the soundbite. She was doing it for the record. Back inside the chamber, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to something resembling a wake. The invincible Hillary Clinton, the inevitable president, had been dissected on live television, but the hearing wasn't over. As the recess ended and the gavel banged again, Gabbard was already prepared for the next phase, the interrogation of the motive. "Mrs. Clinton," Gabbard resumed, her voice refreshed, no sign of fatigue. "We've established the what and the how. Now I want to understand the why. Why create a private server? Why delete the emails? Why solicit foreign money? Why fabricate the Russia hoax?" Clinton had used the break to regroup. Her makeup had been touched up, her posture corrected. She attempted a return to the condescending matriarch persona. Director Gabbard, I have spent my entire life in public service. I have endured decades of right-wing attacks. I did what I thought was necessary to protect my privacy and my work from partisan witch hunts. Partisan witch hunts, Gabbard repeated. That is your shield for everything. But let's look at the mechanics of your operation. I want to enter into the record the memo from Sidney Blumenthal, dated 2011. Blumenthal was barred by the Obama administration from working at the State Department because of his history of spreading disinformation. Yet, you kept him on the payroll of the Clinton Foundation and used him as a private intelligence broker. She held up the email. Blumenthal was sending you intelligence reports on Libya, advising you to intervene. He had business interests in Libya. He was advising you to start a war that he stood to profit from, and you were listening to him over your own intelligence officials. Why? Clinton hesitated. Sid is an old friend. He provided a different perspective. He provided a perspective that aligned with your desire for conflict. Gabbard countered. You sidelined career diplomats. You ignored the warnings of military experts. You created a parallel State Department run by loyalists and donors unaccountable to the American people. This is the pattern, Mrs. Clinton. You built a government within a government, one that served only you. Gabbard pulled out a chart showing the flow of personnel. Huma Abedin, Cheryl Mills, Philippe Raines. These people moved between the State Department, the Clinton Foundation, and a private consulting firm called Teneo. Teneo was founded by Doug Band, your husband's right-hand man. They were selling access to you. Huma Abedin was a special government employee, allowed to work for the State Department and Teneo simultaneously. She was serving the public and private corporate clients at the same time. Conflict of interest isn't even a strong enough word. It is systemic corruption. Clinton tried to interrupt. Huma is a dedicated public servant. Huma Abedin forwarded classified emails to her husband's laptop. Gabbard shot back. Anthony Weiner, a man who was under investigation for sexting with a minor. Classified information ended up on a laptop seized by the NYPD Sex Crimes Unit. That is how careless your inner circle was. Because you didn't fear the law. You thought you owned it. Let's go back to the aftermath of 2016. Gabbard continued. You started a resistance movement. You encouraged faithless electors to overturn the results of the election. You called the sitting president illegitimate multiple times. You claimed the election was stolen from you. I said there were irregularities and interference. Clinton corrected. You questioned the integrity of the democratic process because you lost, Gabbard said. When Donald Trump refused to say he would accept the results of the election during the debate, you called it horrifying. You said he was talking down our democracy. But when you lost, you spent 4 years doing exactly that. You undermined the transition of power. You fed the narrative that the president was a Russian agent. You crippled the administration's ability to conduct foreign policy. Gabbard leaned in close to the microphone. You accused Tulsi Gabbard of being a Russian asset. You accused Jill Stein of being a Russian asset. You accused Donald Trump of being a Russian asset. Anyone who stands in your way is a traitor. Anyone who opposes the establishment is a foreign agent. Do you realize how dangerous that is? You are reviving McCarthyism. You are teaching Americans to see enemies everywhere. You are poisoning the well of our democracy so that no one can drink from it. This is not about policy differences, Mrs. Clinton. This is about a fundamental lack of character. You believe that you are the state, l'état c'est moi, and anyone who opposes you is an enemy of the state. Clinton's face was a mask of stone. She knew the cameras were capturing every micro-expression. She couldn't explode. She couldn't leave. She had to endure this dismantling. I want to ask you about the Seth Rich case, Gabbard said, dropping another bombshell. The air left the room. This was conspiracy territory, the third rail of Washington discourse. I'm not making accusations, Gabbard said quickly, preempting the objection. I'm asking about the response. Seth Rich was a DNC staffer murdered in Washington, D.C. in July 2016. His murder remains unsolved. Julian Assange strongly implied that Rich was the source of the DNC leaks, not Russian hackers. But instead of wanting to find the truth, your allies and the media apparatus immediately labeled any discussion of Seth Rich as a conspiracy theory. They attacked his family. They threatened investigators. Why the panic, Mrs. Clinton? Why was it so important to shut down any inquiry that suggested the leaks came from inside the house, rather than from Moscow? Because it was a tragedy being exploited for political gain, Clinton hissed. Or was it because if the leaks came from a disgruntled insider who was disgusted by the rigging of the primary against Bernie Sanders, then your entire Russia narrative falls apart? Gabbard asked. If it was a leak, not a hack, then there is no Russian interference. If there is no Russian interference, there is no investigation of Trump. The whole house of cards collapses. She let the question hang there, unanswered. We may never know the truth about that night, Gabbard admitted. Just like we may never know what was in the 33,000 emails you deleted. Just like we may never know the full extent of the favors traded through your foundation. Because you are an expert at destroying evidence. You are a master of the cover-up. Gabbard began to gather her papers. The stack was thick, a physical representation of decades of scandal. You once asked, "Why aren't I 50 points ahead?" You remember that. You were frustrated that you were struggling against a reality TV star. You couldn't understand why the American people didn't love you. Gabbard looked at her with something akin to pity. They didn't trust you, Mrs. Clinton. They looked at you and they saw a politician who would say anything, do anything, and be anything to get power. They saw the corruption. They saw the elitism. They saw the disdain. They saw the bodies piling up in the Middle East. They saw the lies about Benghazi. They saw the private server. And they said enough. You blamed the FBI. You blamed Russia, you blamed misogyny, but the truth is much simpler. You lost because the American people saw through you. And today, thanks to this committee and these documents, history sees through you too. Gabbard stood up. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a soldier who had completed a necessary but grim mission. She looked at the chairman. "Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for this witness. The evidence speaks for itself. The witness's record speaks for itself. And the silence of her defense speaks loudest of all." As Gabbard stepped back, the room remained suspended in a strange, heavy silence. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a magic trick being revealed, the wires exposed, the illusion shattered. Hillary Clinton remained seated, staring straight ahead, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. The gavel struck, signaling the end of the session, but the echo of the accusations would ring in that chamber, and in the history books forever. The storm had broken, and in its wake, the landscape of American power lay irrevocably altered.